Hello and welcome back to my channel. How are you all doing? Hope you're well. In this video, I'll be taking things back to basics and looking at the differences between fermentation and pickling. Yes, fermentation is different from pickling, but I find that a lot of people use them interchangeably. Today, I'll be explaining the differences between pickling and fermentation using carrots to demonstrate this. So, if you want to know the differences between pickling and fermentation, please keep watching. First, let's look at the ingredients. For the fermented carrots, I'll be using carrots which I've already peeled, and I'll also be using 4 cloves of garlic, 2 tablespoons of sea salt. I'm using coarse sea salt. You could use fine sea salt as well, but please make sure that your sea salt is pure sea salt and does not contain any anti-caking agents or any other ingredients, as this could affect the outcome of your fermentation. Then I've got my rosemary. I'm using a fresh sprig of rosemary. Then 2 cups of water. Again, for the water, try as much as you can to use chlorine-free water or filtered water. If you live in an area where the water is heavily chlorinated, you could keep the water in a pitcher overnight and place a kitchen towel over it so the chemicals evaporate, and you can use it the following day for your fermentation. Then I've got my glass jar and a glass weight which I'm going to place in the jar to keep the vegetables submerged in the brine so that the vegetables don't become moldy during fermentation. And here's an overview of all the ingredients I'm using for this fermented carrot recipe. Now let's look at the ingredients for the pickled carrot. For the pickled carrots, I'll be using carrots which I've already peeled, a teaspoon of sea salt, and 3 cloves of garlic, fresh rosemary, and bay leaves. Then I've got a tablespoon of brown sugar. Please feel free to use white sugar if that's what you've got available. Then I've got a cup of white vinegar, then a cup of water, and then a glass jar. A point to note with pickling is that generally sugar is added to pickled vegetables so as to balance the tartness of the vinegar. But if you're on a no sugar diet, you could skip the sugar and adjust the water-vinegar ratio so that your pickled vegetable isn't too tart. As you can tell, sea salt is essential for fermentation, while vinegar is essential for pickling. So that means without vinegar, you can't have pickled vegetables, and without sea salt, you can't have fermented vegetables. Although some people have recommended using any form of non-iodized salt, such as pink Himalayan salt, but personally, I've only used sea salt and I've gotten the best results using sea salt when fermenting my vegetables. Next, let's look at the liquid used in fermentation. For the fermented carrots, I'll be making the brine, which is simply adding my sea salt to water. I'm going to mix the sea salt and leave it for a couple of minutes to dissolve. Now, let's look at the liquid required for pickling. So, for the pickled carrots, I'll be making the pickling solution by adding my white vinegar, sea salt, brown sugar, fresh rosemary, bay leaf, and water into a pan. Then I'll turn on the heat. I'll give it a stir and let it cook on low to medium heat. When making pickling solution, the goal is to let the sugar and salt dissolve while the spices infuse their flavors and aroma into the pickling solution. Remember, cooking the pickling solution on high heat will reduce the acidity of the vinegar, which we do not want. Now, I'll turn off the cooker and set the pickling solution aside. As you can tell, brine is required for fermentation while pickling solution is required for pickling. Now, let's take a look at the preparation of the vegetables for pickling and fermenting. So, when it comes to vegetable preparation, there isn't much differences in how you prepare your vegetables, whether you intend to ferment or pickle them. For the sake of this demonstration, I'll be cutting the carrots which I'll be fermenting into half coins and the carrots which I'll be pickling into batten or spears. Whether you're making fermented vegetables or pickled vegetables, something to always bear in mind is to ensure that your space, hands, and utensils are clean so as to avoid contamination or introducing unhealthy or bad bacteria into your vegetables. You also need to sterilize your jar and lid, either by washing them in hot soapy water, using the hot water bath method, or oven method. So for the hot water bath method, I place my jar and lids in hot water and left them to cook on high heat for 10 minutes. After that, I took them out using a tongue and placed them on a clean surface for them to dry naturally without touching them. You could also do this by placing your jars and lid in the oven, turning on the oven to 180 degrees, leaving the jars and lid to cook for up to 10 minutes. That way, your jars and lid will be free from germs and bacteria that could contaminate your vegetables. Also, it's great to try and keep your vegetables evenly sized when fermenting or pickling. This will keep the vegetables fermented at the same rate, allowing the brine or pickling solution to permeate evenly into the vegetables and also maintain a balanced texture. Now, let's look at transferring our vegetables into the jar for fermentation. So, for my fermented carrots, I'll start transferring the carrots into a jar using a tongue. I'll also add some garlic, a sprig of rosemary, and fill the jar until it's compact. The reason why you need to keep the jar as compact as possible is to eliminate any air pockets, creating an anaerobic oxygen-free environment. An oxygen-free environment is important during fermentation because it helps the growth of beneficial lactic acid bacteria while preventing harmful bacteria or mold from developing. Another way of ensuring your jar is fully compact is to use a fermentation tamper to press the vegetables tightly into the jar as shown in this clip. Next, I'll add the brine, which is the saltwater mixture. I'm going to leave some headspace of about 1 to 2 inches at the top to allow for expansion during the fermentation process as gases are released. Leaving a headspace of about 1 to 2 inches is a good practice because sometimes the brine does bubble over once fermentation begins and this seeps through the jar. Next, I'll put in the glass weights to keep the carrots submerged in the brine so that they do not float to the top and get moldy. If you do not have a glass weight, you could use a vegetable as seen in this clip to help keep the vegetables in place and submerged in brine. You could also fill a plastic bag with water and place it in your jar of fermented vegetables. This will help stop the vegetables moving around. Now that everything is done, I'll seal the lid. When fermenting vegetables, try as much as you can to use plastic lids instead of metal lids because the metal lids tend to react with the brine, which is the salt water mixture, leading to rust. And that's that with the fermented carrots. Now, let's look at transferring our vegetables into the jar for pickling. For the pickled carrots, I'll transfer the carrot batten or spears into the jar using a tongue. I'll throw in 3 cloves of garlic and continue transferring the carrots into the jar and add a sprig of rosemary and bay leaf. I'll add the carrots until the jar is packed to my satisfaction, add the pickling solution and seal the jar. As you can tell, you do not need to add a weight to your jar when pickling your vegetables, but it's always great to ensure your vegetables are covered in brine or pickling solution, whether fermenting or pickling, so that the flavors can permeate into the vegetables. Now let's talk about how long it takes for the vegetables to get fermented. For the fermented carrots, I'll keep it on the kitchen counter for 2 weeks out of direct light and place a tray beneath, because when fermentation begins, the brine could bubble over and can cause liquid to seep out of the jar. By placing your jar on a tray during fermentation process, this will avoid your kitchen counter getting ruined. If you live in a warm climate, the vegetables tend to ferment quite quicker compared to living in a cold climate. Also, some people prefer to use an airlock, which helps gases released from the fermentation to escape while preventing oxygen from the atmosphere from entering into the jar. Some people also suggest burping the jar, which is slightly unscrewing your jar to release the gas. Personally, I prefer to seal the jar from day 1 and open it after I feel the vegetable is fully fermented. Now, let's talk about how long it takes for the pickled vegetables to be ready. For the pickled carrots, I'll leave them on the kitchen counter to cool down, then refrigerate them afterwards, which means it can be eaten immediately. But I personally prefer to wait for at least 48 hours before consumption, so that way the aroma and the flavors of the pickling solution would have properly infused into the carrots. Now let's talk about storing your fermented vegetables. Once your fermented vegetables are open, you would need to transfer them into a refrigerator to avoid spoilage. The fermentation would usually continue in the refrigerator, but at a really slow pace. Most fermented vegetables can keep up to 6 months in the refrigerator. When scooping out your fermented vegetable from the jar, try your best to use a clean utensil and avoid double dipping so as not to introduce any bad bacteria into your fermented vegetable. Now let's talk about storing your pickled vegetables. As mentioned earlier, once your pickled vegetables have cooled down, you would need to transfer that into the refrigerator. If you want the vegetables to last for a longer time, you could go ahead to preserve them by doing a hot water bath canning as shown in this clip. Or you could also do the pressure canning method if you've got a pressure canner. The hot water bath canning method involves cooking the jar of pickled vegetables in hot boiling water for an extended period of time, which is also pasteurization. This method prevents contamination and spoilage during storage, kills bad bacteria, preserves the vegetable quality, and creates a vacuum seal which prevents air entering into the fermented vegetable. As you can tell, fermented foods are more beneficial when they are not heated because they are live foods that contain a lot of probiotics, vitamins, polyphenols, and gut-friendly bacteria which could get ruined if exposed to heat, which is why I prefer to eat my fermented vegetables in salad and sandwiches. All in all, both fermented and pickled vegetables are a great way to stay healthy, but one is a live food while the other is not, but still a great addition to one's diet. So, I guess we've come to the end of this video. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comment section, and if you've got any suggestions and any ideas as well, please leave them in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video and found it really helpful, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to my channel, and please don't forget to click the notification bell icon so that you can get notified whenever I upload a new video. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye!